The Denver Broncos quarterback competition is heating up as week 3 of OTAs is here. Sean Payton is confident and has a level of comfortability with his quarterback room. We'll tell you why here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much once again to everyone in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there for making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, as always, you can get this show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So do us a favor, if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on the freshest, most objective Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. On top of that, I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Been covering the team in person daily in Dove Valley. Joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, who is the site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. Check out his written work and more over there. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Sayre, quarterback competition is definitely the one area where everybody in Broncos country, they're focused on the potential outcome, the potential tell of the tape between these three guys. So as OTAs continues, we dive into week 3 here. I think it's important to know, okay, what have these quarterbacks done so far through weeks 1, weeks 2, and what do we want to see from them here in week 3 of OTAs? And really, we're going to focus on every quarterback. We're going to talk about Zach Wilson still learning the Broncos offense, Jarrett Stidham having a steady presence in Dove Valley, and Bo Nix, can he continue sustaining good performances so far throughout OTAs? That's what we're going to kick things off with here. And I think more importantly, Sayre, everything that we've seen from Bo Nix, and obviously I think a lot of things that fans have heard about Bo Nix coming out of OTAs, it has to instill a level of confidence that, hey, there's a different vibe in terms of how maybe a quarterback competition is being covered in Denver. You don't really have any distractions inside that room as, you know, you've had the last several handful of years. Right now, Bo Nix is playing really well. He's consistent. He's steady as well as Jarrett Stidham has been, but he's also looking the part of a guy that the Broncos drafted 12th overall, and that right there should provide Broncos country with a little bit of excitement.
It definitely should. And I think regardless of his draft status, really what I love to hear is what Sean Payton said a couple of weeks ago, right? That Bo is essentially, he's like, I don't want to say boring, but I like that he said that, you know, boring, that word, because what does that mean? That means that he's not out there making a ton of mistakes. He's not out there having to kind of fail forward in a sense. He's hitting the ground running. I think one of the biggest things with Bo Nix coming out of Oregon was that, man, he's a smart quarterback and he's one of the most pro-ready guys in this draft. And we heard all about that. And now we're seeing the fruit of that. We're seeing the evidence of that, if you will, with him being able to go out there and not be. Remember the comment that Vic Fangio made once upon a time about Drew Lock at training camp? He basically said, you know, he's a pitcher out there that doesn't know how to pitch. I mean, would you rather your quarterback be the pitcher who doesn't know how to pitch, or would you rather him be boring at OTAs because he's so methodical in the way that he approaches his work? I mean, it's really encouraging to hear. And so I guess you don't need like a ton of the sidearm throws and the flashy stuff like that. Like, you don't need to be seeing these videos of him doing crazy stuff out there, because he's not a circus act. He's an NFL quarterback, and he's going to have to go out there and start managing games quickly. So to me, the fact that it's maybe been a little boring from him is good if you're Sean Payton. Now, if you're Broncos fans, that's anything but boring, because good quarterback play, well, that would be amazing to have in 2024.
Yeah, to add a little bit more context to that quote in terms of what he had said about Bo, in terms of the reference of, he mentioned, he says, and Sean had said it as well. It says in the quote, he says, I don't want to say boring, but he's like a really good golfer. Like, everything he does, from in terms of just watching him, he does it, and you're like, how does he do it so well consistently? Like, that was the context in which, because I know some Broncos fans will see that and are like, what, he's boring? What? Oh, that's not really a good endorsement. The context matters, folks. And I think if you have questions, go back and look at Sean's press conference. Like, Bo Nix has been so steady, and he's been sustainably good so far. And I think the bigger question we have is, can he maintain that level of success that we've seen from him in terms of commanding the operation? Look, and how we evaluate this right now before the pads come on is, Are these quarterbacks coming in? Are they making mistakes? Are there penalties that are setting the offense back? Like, so far, we haven't really seen that when Bo has been running the huddle, when he's been under center. What I have seen from him, the things that he's done well, that we saw him do well in week 2 of OTAs, he threw with anticipation. Like, he understands where the routes are, how they're adjusting based on coverage, and he's throwing them with confidence. Like, I mean, I'm watching him, and I'm watching him on every single drop back there from the time he's in pre-snap. He's maybe calling a hard count. Okay, he's audibling. He's checking into something. Okay, he's getting the ball in his hands. He's going through his reads 1, 2, 3, sometimes like there, or he's getting to his first read, sees it's coming open, and he sits there and he delivers a strike with confidence. And on top of that, there has been some elements where there has been pressure simulated, right? From an inside linebacker blitz, maybe a nickel, maybe a guy off the outside getting past the offensive tackle in a certain situation based on how they're trying to scheme up a pressure look defensively. And you're seeing Bo stand in the confidence, and he's not moving. He's not phased by, okay, hey, there's this guy that's coming to my side. Like, you can tell that Bo senses where guys are coming from left and right, or even up the middle, but he doesn't panic. And I think that early on level of comfortability has been good. Now, I think maybe what is it that we can see more of, right, is he had several throws last week of 20-plus yards, not necessarily like deep bombs, but it's like methodical. Like, he had one play to Josh Reynolds where he threw it 20 yards to the outside and only to a place where Josh Reynolds could catch it. And I was like, man, so many of the questions that people had about potential arm strength, haven't seen any issue, haven't seen anything that brings up a question of that so far in OTAs. Threw it to a spot where only Josh Reynolds could get it, because Levi Wallace had really good coverage. And it's just one of those throws that's it's high, it's to the outside, and it's like, as a DB, you're like, what am I supposed to do in this situation? 2 feet in, move the chains for a first down. He's making throws that are moving the chains in their first down, second down, third down emphases. And I think that's huge to carry on going forward. And on top of that, I would like to see, in terms of this, and this is just maybe me being a little bit picky, will we get a chance to see him take some shots downfield? I'm talking like, okay, hey, Jarrett Stidham last week had a 55-yard bomb to Marvin Mims. I want to see Bo Nix throw a 55, 60-yard bomb to Marvin Mims as well. Will we see that? Like, if I'm going into week 3 of OTAs, Sayre, that's something I'm looking forward to seeing. Hopefully this week, we'll see if that does come to fruition here. But in terms of the quarterback competition, Jarrett Stidham as well has been very steady so far running Sean Payton's offense. Can he continue that level of pace as he looks to get the starting quarterback job in the fall? We'll break down Jarrett Stidham here on today's brand new episode of Locked On Broncos. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And look, folks, the NBA Finals are here. It's an exciting matchup between the Boston Celtics, the Dallas Mavericks. And if you're in those markets and you want to go to an NBA Finals game, it's easier now with the Game Time app, because Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Not only the NBA Finals, but your favorite NFL games this upcoming season. If you're in the Seattle area, you want to see the Broncos Week 1 game, because Broncos Country travels well. You can also get Broncos tickets to the Seahawks game Week 1 inside the Game Time app, and you get to see all-in pricing, where when you toggle this feature, it shows you your total up front, so you're not left with any surprise fees when you check out. They get seat views where you get a panoramic view from your seat inside the app before you buy, so you have the best vantage point of all the action, whether that's on the hardwood or at an NFL stadium. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Steady as he goes, Jarrett Stidham is not going to be giving up that starting quarterback job in Denver without a fight this offseason, and we're going to talk about what he needs to continue to do well at OTAs, as he's been having kind of a quietly good offseason, and we're going to discuss that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But want to say thank you and give a shout out to all of you who make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And look, if you've been consuming national coverage from national media outlets like I have your whole life, there's something brand new that you've got to try today. It's called Locked On Sports, and it's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that's programmed for you, giving you the content and coverage you want for the teams that you love. And Locked On Sports today, it brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, and it's streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's talk about Jarrett Stidham having kind of a good offseason. I don't know that I don't want to put it this way, Cody, but I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't know that everybody's really welcoming the idea of him having a good offseason, because what could that mean? Well, it could mean that he kind of puts a lid on Bo Nix as a rookie, and maybe Bo doesn't start every game this year. I think Jarrett Stidham having a good offseason is good for everybody. Tell us what you're seeing from him out there on the field. I know we've heard good things from Sean Payton and from you and others who are covering practice. What are you seeing out there that he's doing well, and what does he have to continue to do as we get into week 3 of OTAs here?
Well, I'd say one thing he has done well from week 1 to week 2. And like I said, in the practices we've seen, like on the Thursdays we're able to attend, he's the guy getting the second reps behind Bo Nix, right? And as we all know, Sean has said that there's a rotation that, Tuesdays it's Stiddy, Wednesdays it's Zach leading the way, and then Thursdays, which happens to be the day we attend, it's Bo Nix. We'll see. Is there how much truth is there to that? We don't know here. But here's what Jarrett has done well. He's moved the ball consistently well in all the Broncos' various team periods, whether that's 7-on-7, first down, second down, and then also the third down emphasis. Jarrett has been steady. And that might be his new nickname, Steady Stidham at this point. Is steady what the Broncos need going forward? At the position, you want that, but you also want the ability to make plays, put up points on the offensive side of the ball. Jarrett is the one quarterback I'll say. He had the longest throw of a Broncos quarterback in OTA so far in the practices we've been able to attend. I'd mentioned it earlier, the 55-yard bomb to Marvin Mims. And look, it was a great throw. Like, Jarrett did a really good job going through his progression. And then he just fired it down to Marvin, led him in anticipation to a spot where only Marvin was going to get the football. Okay, that's a veteran move. You like to see that. Jarrett has been really good. Like, as you mentioned, he's not going down in this potential quarterback competition without a fight. And the thing I like about Jarrett here, and look, you and I, we've shared our personal thoughts, our own personal opinion and preference on what the Broncos should do at QB. You and I are both in agreement that we think just Bo Nix should be the starter week 1, regardless of the situation here. But if you're truly going to build as a quarterback competition, you have to give Jarrett Stidham his flowers in terms of how he's performed here early on. And like with Bo Nix, with all these quarterbacks, we're anticipating to see, okay, what is it going to look like when the pads come on, when there is a little bit more pressure, when you are going to see guys, offensive linemen who are going to have to deal with strong defensive tackles, blitzing linebackers, edge rushers that can actually put their hands physically on them to be able to influence it. And then we're going to be debating every day after practice, was that a sack? Was it not a sack? Like, that's my favorite time of July. But overall, Jarrett has not kind of blinked a little bit in this competition, which I think you obviously have to give him, his props there. And look, I've never had anything against Jarrett Stidham, and I think some fans have interpreted us saying that Bo Nix should be the starter means that we don't like Jarrett Stidham. That's not the case. Like, our emphasis is Denver went out and they drafted a rookie quarterback, 12th overall, who's got the tools to run Sean Payton's offense, even if Jarrett does. But when you look at athleticism and potential, Bo Nix right now might have a little bit more to offer, right? And that's not a shot against Jarrett Stidham. Jarrett's been in the NFL going into 5 seasons and only has a handful of starts in his career. That, I think, is something we can't look over. But he's not really embracing this quarterback competition like it's me against these guys. Like, obviously, he's acknowledged, hey, I'm competing here. But I would say where I'm going to give Jarrett some props here, Sayre, he is also taking these guys under his wing as well, like as the 5th-year veteran who doesn't have as much starts as Zach Wilson. Like, Zach Wilson, of all people, has more starts than Jarrett Stidham, but Jarrett has been in some good quarterback rooms. He's been in some good offensive systems, and he's got a good process to where even though he is competing for a job this year, he's helping Bo Nix, he's helping Zach Wilson learn this offense a little more because he's definitely got a year of experience playing inside of it. And he's playing well so far. Now, if I have to highlight anything, what is it that maybe we can see more of, or what do we want to see? Can he maintain his apparent comfort in the system? Like, through 2 weeks, it's looked good. What does he look like here in week 3? Want to be able to see if he can continue to stack performances in terms of how he's playing when he's involved in the team drills. And I think that's a really good area and a good place for Stidham to be right now in this competition.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Cody, but from my seat, my vantage point here, here's kind of what I view this competition between these two guys right now. I view this competition as Bo Nix's to lose, right? And what I mean by that is that I don't think that Jarrett Stidham can necessarily go out there and keep the starting quarterback position, right? I think like he ended last year as the starter, but I don't know that it's necessarily his job to keep. I think Bo would have to go out there and be bad enough to lose that position to Jarrett Stidham, as opposed to, let's say these guys both continue to, as you're talking about with Bo Nix. I mean, he's having a good offseason. He's showing that he's ready and up to the task. Jarrett Stidham also having a good offseason. I think maybe you can clarify this for Broncos country from what your perspective is, but like the way that I see it is if these guys both have a good offseason, that Jarrett Stidham is not the starter. That it would be Bo Nix. If they both have a good offseason, it's Bo as the starter, and that Bo is going to have to lose this job to Jarrett week 1 in order to be able for, to have Jarrett Stidham be the starting quarterback of this team. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but what's your take on that? Because that's kind of how I view it, is that like Jarrett isn't like, all right, he's entrenched as QB1 and Bo has to climb up the rung here of the depth chart. To me, that's kind of how I see it at this point.
Yeah, no, and I think that's 110% fair. Like in terms of Bo's playing really well in OTAs, Jarrett's playing well in OTAs. Well, who did you draft 12th overall? Who do you have on a rookie deal right now? Who is going to be the guy that you have envisioned as your franchise quarterback? For Sean Payton, that is Bo Nix. So if Bo is playing well and he's doing good, why give it, to somebody else at this point? Like Jarrett can play well, but I still, like I said, if Jarrett can be steady Stidham is the nickname that we're going to be handing him. He can be steady. He can be that game manager. Like the Broncos don't need that, even though I think it would be a valued, welcome thing that they haven't had in quite some time. Like I don't know how many games you're going to win because of Jarrett Stidham, essentially, right? Like last year, for as much as Russell Wilson is going to get criticism, the Broncos don't win a handful of games without Russ doing some of the things that Russ has historically done well throughout his career. Whereas you look at Stidham, it's like the Broncos really outside of the Chargers game where the defense just really made it hard for Easton Stick and that team to really do anything offensively. The Broncos defense, and outside of that little Jordan Humphrey 54-yard catch and run, Jarrett Stidham didn't necessarily help the Broncos win that game in a big way. Like he wasn't the driving factor behind it. It was the defense, and it was little Jordan Humphrey's extra effort play and good blocking by Michael Burton downfield. And then you look at that Raiders game, obviously it was a disaster. Like Jarrett didn't really have a lot of help around him, even though I think he found Jerry Jeudy for that touchdown, did some things relatively well. My point being here, what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of excitement right now in the eyes of most of the fan base surrounding Bo Nix in terms of, okay, you drafted this guy to be this guy. Give him the keys, let him make his mistakes along the way. But if he's playing good, he's playing manageable as a rookie, you're happy about that because you're having something you can evaluate. How can he grow and how can he get better? Jarrett Stidham starts week 1 against the Seahawks. Let's say the Broncos struggle. The Boo Birds, the fan base is going to be like, put Bo in. Like, what are we doing at this point? It's a very interesting dynamic that the Broncos are in right now. I still think it's going to be Bo Nix, but I do think that Jarrett Stidham is continuing to say, hey, don't write me off just yet. Stidham is also in a position as well, sir, and I think you and I have talked about this off air. I don't think we brought it up on air. Remember last year with Josh Dobbs, like Josh was in the preseason department of going through playing and having some reps, getting traded and then getting traded once again at the NFL trade deadline. And then having that little bit of a stretch where, hey, all of a sudden, is Josh Dobbs the future franchise quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings? And he made the Broncos he was tough. Like it was to the point where we were after the game talking to Baron Brown and Jonathan Cooper. And they're like, that is the hardest. That guy is so hard to tackle. Like he said, we thought we had him and then he got away. Like he scrambled away. Like it's one of the hardest dudes I've ever gone against, in terms of trying to sack and tackle there. To me, I think Jarrett is in a position where he can elevate his stock this offseason, right? If there is this competition that's ongoing, he's playing well. He could actually get an opportunity to land on a team, I think, in a trade during the preseason. I think that's something that we could see here, something to throw out there. But overall, Jarrett has been steady. I have no criticisms on his game so far throughout 2 weeks of OTA practices. Can he continue to sustain that and showcase his level of comfort? That's a storyline we're going to be watching going through here in week 3 of Broncos OTAs. But how is it for new quarterback Zach Wilson, who went from one organization with a lot of starts under his belt, not a winning record at 12-21? How does he come into the mix now for Sean Payton's offense? And what can he do in week 3 of OTAs? We'll tell you that here and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. This next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. And sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today I want to say how I really feel about something, and you might even be thinking about the same thing. Life sometimes doesn't come with a playbook. We don't know sometimes how to deal with stressful situations when they arise. And sometimes that's where therapy can come in and help you find the tools that you need to overcome anxiety, depression, or even other things like even your personal professional career. I want to talk to you about my experience with BetterHelp when I utilize them. I had a really tough time balancing my time, stress management between, starting a new career, balancing everything I have to do in my day-to-day life and dealing with the anxiety that came with that. My therapist, she connected me with some of the tools and the resources possible that helped me understand how to be in better control of some of my situations and circumstances. And these are still tools that I use in my everyday life. And I utilize that by learning that through BetterHelp therapy. Therapy can be different for everyone. And most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team. And it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we'll be discussing Zach Wilson and his going through the process of still learning a brand new offensive scheme. What have we seen from him so far? Where can he grow? What do we want to see this week? We'll dive into that here on today's episode of the show. But real quick, wanted to say thank you once again to all the everydayers out there in Broncos country for making us your first listen of the day every single day on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Just a reminder, if you listen to us on Mondays or Tuesdays, only 2 episodes a week, we got to ask you to bump that up to 5 episodes a week because we have fresh objective coverage for you Monday through Friday here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. So turn that 2 listens per week into 5 listens per week for all you everydayers out there in Broncos country. All right, let's talk about Zach Wilson. Sayre, I will open this up by saying so far through 2 weeks of OTAs, I've talked a lot about on my own personal social media. I've talked a lot about Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham, and I've had people ask me, well, how come you're not talking so much about Zach Wilson? Because in context of this quarterback competition relative to the first 2 guys that we've talked about, Zach Wilson hasn't really shown much yet. And that's not saying that he can't or that he won't showcase anything in his quarterback battle. But I want to say, like, when you're looking at these 2 guys in Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham, you can tell that they're a little bit miles ahead of Zach Wilson. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, Bo Nix has learned a multitude of different offensive systems so far throughout his college career. Like, he's very smart. That was one reason the Broncos drafted him. Jarrett Stidham's been in some really good quarterback rooms, knows this offense already. Zach Wilson is going in an environment where, while at times their offense looked better than Denver's has, there hasn't been a lot of sustainability in terms of the schemes in which Zach Wilson has been a part of offensively. He's learning a new one, which we all know in Sean Payton's scheme is difficult. It's hard to learn at first, but once you grasp it, guys have success. It's been early so far. Zach Wilson hasn't been terrible, but he hasn't been great. And I think that's kind of where we highlight where Zach is at here as we go into week 3 of OTAs.
I think it's important for the Broncos and Broncos fans to be extremely patient with Zach Wilson, right? Because since he was at BYU, and I can't speak to the offense they ran at BYU or coaching and things like that, but doesn't it kind of feel like Zach has been getting by on talent for the majority of what we've known from him over the last 4 or 5 years, I guess, dating back to his time at BYU? I mean, he's been really talented, and he's always been talented. He's got a big arm. He made, a lot of people think that he could be the next Patrick Mahomes, became the 2nd pick in the draft because of that, and does all these things really well physically and athletically. But what Sean Payton and his staff have an opportunity to do is take the ball of clay that Zach Wilson is and remold, right? They have the opportunity to remold and utilize those skills and hone him in to make him a good quarterback, because he's a talented athlete. He ran all over the Broncos a couple of times in matchups that they've
beaten him twice.
He's beaten them twice. I mean, he's so talented that he's been able to overcome an inability to, like, you can tell that if you're trying to like line these two things up, meaning Zach Wilson's talent and an offensive scheme, like it's just this constant wave that's nothing is like, settling anywhere, right? And we can see that, and you can tell that his talent has been able to overcome his inability to sort of grasp an NFL offense up to this point, or to be able to, let's just call it, he's maybe been a square peg in a round hole type of thing. And all this constant change at such a young age in his formative years with a bad team around him, frankly, in New York, injuries all around. I think Cody, he hasn't been given the greatest of circumstances to work with. I think let's give him some time to see if he can adapt, to see if he can, once he masters the offense, just like we saw with Jameis Winston in New Orleans, where, I mean, Bruce Arians wanted nothing to do with that guy after he threw 30 interceptions, right? And Bruce Arians, a pretty good coach. Sean Payton gets him, and all of a sudden, through 6-7 games, Jameis has his highest touchdown percentage ever and his lowest interception percentage ever. How does that happen? Well, time. It took over a year for him to get acclimated to that offense. So that's why I think with Zach Wilson, I think we pump the brakes. I know everybody wants to know, they want to see the overnight success story from him, but I don't think you necessarily need that. And even if he does have a rough go in camp or even the preseason, like, this is an investment of time. Reclamation projects they're projects. They take time.
Well, and on top of that as well, I think Wilson can find himself in a similar situation that I brought up about Jarrett Stidham if they perform well during the preseason. Like, you could potentially find him, on the trade market somewhere else, depending on where Denver is at here. I think more so here, as we talked about in terms of where can he improve relative to Nix and Stidham, like Wilson hasn't stood out yet necessarily in 2 practices, right? But it's not a large sample size in terms of where he's at. What did we see from him in the first week of OTAs? Obviously, you can see the arm talent. Like when he drops back, whether it's play action, whether it's shotgun, the quick game, this is a guy that has a little bit of a laser arm. Like, he can fit it into tight windows. He threw an interception, right? He's the only quarterback so far in the practices we've been able to attend that has had a turnover, has had some mistakes there in that department. So what did we see in week 2 last week? Well, I think the balance of what we were looking for is, it seemed like instead of relying so much on his arm talent, he seemed to take a little bit more of what the defense gave him. Like, he was playing it safe, playing it smart, had a couple of good passes that moved the chains for a first down in the third down period. But he also had several checkdowns, right? Like, his emphasis was a little bit more of the checkdown. So knowing what we know now, knowing what we've seen so far in weeks 1 and weeks 2, what do we want to see more of here in week 3 of Broncos OTAs when Zach, in the session we actually have availability to, can he find a level of comfort inside of the new scheme as he's still learning it, by the way? And can he have that balance? Can he showcase that balance between being aggressive and also being smart and safe protecting the football, right? Because I want to see Zach Wilson out there firing a 35-yard strike across the middle of the field or a bomb downfield and making a big play, like with the talent that he has in terms of his arm. But I also don't want him to do that at the expense of throwing it where you have a corner underneath, safety over the top, and then somebody else there like throwing it into triple coverage or double coverage. I don't want to see that happen. So can he find that balance? To me, I think that's going to be the biggest key for Zach when we talk about this battle this week in terms of what we're looking for in week 3 of OTAs. I think that's a fair place to evaluate where things are at, because there's a situation here, Sayre, where let's say Bo Nix wins the starting job, which we anticipate. That's our own belief of what we think is going to happen. I still think there is a very distinct possibility Zach Wilson could be the team's backup, despite how steady Stidham has been so far during OTAs. And then you see Zach back on the team next year as the backup to Bo. And it's a very distinct possibility here, even though that Jarrett Stidham has had a little bit of a better body of work than him so far.
I think it's a very distinct possibility, really, when you talk about potential cap savings, right? If you trade Jarrett Stidham, it's $6 million in cap savings. If you cut him, it's $5 million. I know the Broncos are expecting to have a lot more cap space next offseason, but look, every dollar counts at this stage when you're talking about rebuilding this roster and getting it to the point that, all right, if we found our guy at the quarterback position, we need to roll over as much cap space as we can. So that does become part of the discussion. And that's kind of where I'm coming from when I say, like, I don't know that Jarrett can necessarily win this starting quarterback competition. Like, I don't know that the Broncos are in a spot right now to be able to say, like, oh yeah, he's out there out practicing Bo Nix every day. They're more so in the position of having to be able to hey, we're going to live through whatever growing pains we got to go through, and we're going to take the cap savings, and we drafted this guy in the first round, and XYZ. That's just kind of the reality of where things are at. So I'm with you on that. I feel like even if Zach has a bit of struggle this offseason, throwing interceptions at camp or the preseason or what have you, I still think that he could end up being the QB2 on this team, and he has the experience to be able to justify that, right? I mean, he has more starts than either Bo Nix or Jarrett Stidham combined at this, probably even Davis Webb at this stage, right? I don't know how many games he ever started, but look, I mean, Zach Wilson has plenty of experience, and certainly he's one of those guys that talent, you want that talent with Sean Payton and Davis Webb and the offensive coaching staff, right? You want that talent in the room because he's going to provide an X factor when the pads come on. I guarantee you, and he's running away from pass rushers and things. I guarantee you his arm strength, his escapability, all that stuff is going to be on full display, and the conversation could really change.
I will say this as well, maybe something I forgot to mention about Zach that we did see in week one. Like, for example, when there was pressure coming his way, like, I don't know if that's because of you got to exercise those demons, right? But his first instinct when there was some of the pressure and his first read wasn't there was to tuck the ball and run it. Like, even in some 7-on-7 stuff, which 7-on-7 is a passing drill. You never want to run the ball in 7-on-7. Like this, some of the stuff we saw there. But you look at where the money's at, right? Obviously, the Broncos have Bo Nix on a rookie contract, pretty low salary cap hit. You want to capitalize on that window and get him as much reps and experience as possible. Whereas, okay, you look at Jarrett Stidham, you look at Zach Wilson, you follow the money here. Stidham is set to make more and count more against the cap than Zach Wilson is. And both of these guys, they're not on this roster right now after 2024. Like, you're going to have to re-sign one of them, or you're going to have to move in a different direction, whether that be free agency or the draft next year in terms of getting a backup behind Bo Nix. So to me, all signs point to it. Okay, Bo Nix being the guy, but all signs point to it as well. Like, Zach Wilson could be, as for all the things that you mentioned, could very well be the backup to Bo Nix this upcoming season. Look, Broncos country, this is obviously a topic that is very, very interesting, presents a lot of different talking points, a lot of different viewpoints from fans, media members alike. Let us know what you thought about today's episode show and the progress of the quarterback battle as week 3 of OTAs commences. But with that said, the Broncos set to practice here once again on Thursday in Dove Valley. For tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos, for all you everydayers out there, Sayre and myself, we're going to give you 3 players we have our eyes on this week at Broncos OTAs, not at the quarterback position. You'll get that much more in tomorrow's brand new episode of the show.